Chosen one, someone is absolutely panicking right now because you are the complete opposite of everything they said you were. And the whole damn world is waking up to the fact that they're nothing but a pathetic liar whose house of cards is collapsing in real time. They're checking your posts with shaking hands, watching you glow while their lies rot, hearing whispers that no longer echo their poisonous narrative, and witnessing people ask the kind of questions that make frauds sweat through their clothes, because deep down, everyone knows the truth is rising and their fiction is dying. You didn't just survive their character assassination, you transcended it entirely. While they were busy spinning tales of your supposed darkness, you were undergoing a metamorphosis so profound that it would eventually make their lies look like children's fairy tales told by someone who never learned how to lie convincingly. The cosmic joke in all of this is that they set out to destroy your reputation, but they accidentally became the architect of your greatest revelation. Every lie they told about you became a mirror that reflected their own shadow back at them. Every story they spun to make you look unstable became evidence of their own internal chaos. They thought they were burying you, but they were actually planting seeds in soil that would eventually bloom into something they could never compete with: authentic spiritual power. You see, Chosen One, there's something about your energy signature that threatens people who live in deception. It's not conscious on their part, it's more primitive than that. Your very presence activates something in them that they've been running from their entire lives, the confrontation with their own inauthenticity. When someone who lives in truth enters a room filled with people wearing masks, the masks begin to feel heavier. The performance becomes more exhausting, the pretense starts to crack under the weight of what's real. This is why they launched their preemptive strike against you. They sensed on some primal level that your awakening would eventually expose their spiritual poverty. They knew that once you fully stepped into your power, the contrast between who you are and who they pretend to be would become impossible to ignore. So they did what desperate people do. They tried to destroy your credibility before you could inadvertently destroy their illusions. The first domino in their elaborate scheme was projection, a calculated strategy where they took everything ugly about themselves and pinned it on you like a scarlet letter. They called you disloyal while they were the ones double-dealing behind closed doors. They labeled you controlling while they were pulling strings and manipulating outcomes. They accused you of attention-seeking while they were crying for validation in every room they entered. This wasn't random chaos, it was psychological warfare disguised as truth-telling. They were operating under the assumption that chosen ones respond to attacks the same way ordinary people do, with retaliation, bitterness, and a desperate need to defend themselves. They expected you to fight fire with fire, to meet their public assassination attempts with equally dramatic counterattacks. They were banking on you playing their game by their rules, descending to their level of consciousness and engaging in the kind of spiritual mud wrestling that would make everyone involved look equally dirty. Instead, you did something that completely short-circuited their strategy. You went silent. Not the silence of defeat or submission, but the silence of someone who had found something more powerful than words. While they were creating chaos in the external world, you turned inward and began the most dangerous work a chosen one can do. You started healing. You began transforming every wound they inflicted into wisdom, every betrayal into discernment, every moment of isolation into deeper connection with your own divine nature. What they didn't anticipate was how your silence would amplify their noise. While they continued their campaign of character assassination, speaking louder and more frequently to maintain their narrative, you were becoming a master of strategic non-engagement. This wasn't passive submission, it was an active choice. You understood that engaging with lies dignifies them, gives them energy, makes them seem worthy of debate. Instead, you chose to let your life become the argument. During this crucial phase, something remarkable began happening in the spaces you used to occupy. The dynamics they blamed on your presence didn't disappear with your absence, they intensified. The drama they attributed to your energy continued without you there to absorb it. The conflicts they claimed you caused kept erupting, but now there was no convenient scapegoat to point toward. The uncomfortable truth began emerging that perhaps the common denominator in all their relationship failures wasn't you, it was them. People started noticing patterns they'd been too distracted to see before. Without your presence to focus their attention on, they began observing the accuser more closely. They witnessed how conversations became toxic when this person entered the room. They saw how drama followed them from place to place, relationship to relationship, situation to situation. The spotlight that had been artificially directed toward you began naturally shifting toward where it belonged. Meanwhile, you were experiencing a profound internal shift that would later prove to be the foundation of your complete vindication. You weren't just healing from their attacks, you were evolving beyond their entire level of consciousness. Every attempt they made to diminish you actually strengthened your spiritual immune system. Every lie they told about you became a catalyst for deeper self-reflection and authentic growth. The second domino fell when your character began withstanding the test of time. They had gambled everything on your eventual breakdown, betting that the pressure of their lies would crack your foundation and prove their narrative correct. Time passed and you're still standing, not just surviving but thriving with a consistency that makes their accusations look increasingly hollow. Your relationships didn't crumble, they deepened with people who could see through the fog of deception. Your work didn't fall apart, it flourished as you channeled your pain into purpose. You began displaying qualities that directly contradicted every aspect of their character assassination. Where they claimed you were unstable, you demonstrated unwavering equilibrium. Where they insisted you were toxic, you radiated health and vitality. Where they painted you as manipulative, you showed transparent authenticity. The contrast became so stark that maintaining their narrative required increasingly elaborate mental gymnastics from anyone still believing it. The people who initially believed their stories about you started experiencing cognitive dissonance. They would see you at gatherings, calm and centered, and wonder how someone described as volatile could carry such peaceful energy. They would witness your interactions with others, kind, respectful, genuinely caring, and struggle to reconcile that with the person they'd been told was manipulative and toxic. The gap between their direct experience of you and the narrative they'd been fed grew wider with each encounter. Your accuser found themselves in the increasingly uncomfortable position of having to work harder and harder to maintain credibility. What had once been effortless character assassination now required elaborate explanations for why reality didn't match their descriptions. They had to create increasingly complex justifications for why someone they'd painted as destructive appeared to be thriving in every measurable way. But the real panic set in when your transformation became undeniable, when your spiritual growth reached a point where it couldn't be hidden or dismissed, when your energy shifted so dramatically that even casual observers could sense something profound had changed about you. This wasn't just someone who had recovered from drama or moved on from conflict. This was someone who had been fundamentally transformed by their trials, someone who had used opposition as a catalyst for evolution. The transformation wasn't subtle or gradual, it was profound and unmistakable. Your energy signature has fundamentally altered. Where there once might have been reactivity, there was now responsive wisdom. Where there might have been defensiveness, there was now grounded confidence. Where there might have been bitterness, there was now genuine peace. This wasn't performed or put on for show. It was authentic change that radiated from your very being. The third domino crashed when your accusers realized that people don't just accept words at face value forever. Human beings are wired for pattern recognition, and sooner or later, curiosity overrides indoctrination. The quiet observers in the background, the ones who never said much but noticed everything, began comparing notes. They watched how you carried yourself, how you didn't retaliate, how you kept moving forward with grace, while your accusers remained stuck in the same destructive patterns. Your former accusers found themselves in an impossible position. They could continue insisting you were unstable while you radiated stability. They could keep claiming you were toxic while you demonstrated nothing but health and vitality. They could maintain that you were manipulative while you showed authentic vulnerability and genuine care for others. With each passing day, their position became more untenable, their stories more obviously false, their credibility more damaged by their insistence on defending the indefensible. The whispers started small, friends questioning inconsistencies in the stories they'd been told, colleagues noting the stark contrast between reputation and reality, family members wondering if they'd been fed incomplete information. These weren't dramatic confrontations or public exposures, but quiet moments of private doubt that accumulated like drops of water wearing away stone. Each question, each raised eyebrow, each moment of confusion about why the villain of the story looked nothing like a villain added weight to a scale that was tipping inexorably toward truth. What your accuser hadn't counted on was the power of collective observation. While they could control the initial narrative and influence early opinions, they couldn't control what people saw with their own eyes over extended periods. The human mind is remarkably good at pattern recognition, and patterns of authenticity versus patterns of deception become obvious when observed consistently over time. A fascinating psychological phenomenon began occurring among those who had initially believed the false narrative. They started experiencing what researchers call belief revision anxiety, the uncomfortable feeling that comes when evidence contradicts deeply held beliefs. Some doubled down on the original story, becoming even more invested in maintaining its truth despite mounting contradictory evidence. Others began the difficult but necessary process of acknowledging they might have been misled. The most perceptive observers began noticing something even more telling than your positive transformation. They began recognizing the signs of deception in your accuser. They saw how stories changed slightly with each telling, how details became more dramatic over time, how emotional manipulation was used to prevent questions or critical thinking. They witnessed the exhausting effort required to maintain false narratives and the increasing desperation that comes when lies start unraveling. During this period, you were also undergoing what could only be described as a spiritual initiation. The trials you faced weren't random misfortunes. They were precisely calibrated challenges designed to activate dormant aspects of your consciousness. Every attack on your character became an opportunity to clarify your values. Every moment of isolation became a chance to deepen your connection with your authentic self. Every betrayal became a lesson in discernment. This initiation process revealed gifts you didn't know you possessed. Your intuition sharpened to laser precision. Your ability to see through deception became almost supernatural. Your capacity for genuine compassion, even toward those who had wounded you, expanded beyond what you thought possible. You weren't just recovering from trauma, you were being forged into something stronger, wiser, and more spiritually powerful than you'd ever been. The fourth domino toppled when your evolution forced others to re-evaluate everything they thought they knew. Your growth didn't come with loud announcements or dramatic speeches. It happened in silence, in private moments where no one was watching. But now the results were undeniable. You walked into rooms with a peace that couldn't be faked, a presence that spoke louder than any denial ever could. You weren't just surviving, you were glowing, thinking clearly, moving with grace and carrying yourself like someone who knows exactly who they are. Meanwhile, you were experiencing something that your accusers couldn't have imagined in their worst fears. You were attracting the very things they claimed you would repel. Healthy relationships began forming around your authentic energy. Opportunities opened up as people recognized your genuine character. Your reputation grew organically, built not on manufactured stories, but on consistent demonstration of who you really were. You weren't defending yourself against their lies, you were simply living in such a way that the lies defended themselves out of existence. This organic growth of your reputation created a feedback loop that accelerated their panic. The more you thrived, the more obviously false their characterizations became. The more peaceful you appeared, the more chaotic their continued attacks looked. The more successful you became, the more their attempts to diminish you appeared motivated by jealousy rather than legitimate concern. But perhaps most threatening to them was how your success began attracting attention from people outside their sphere of influence. New connections, mentors, collaborators, and friends who had never heard the false narrative began entering your life. These people formed opinions about you based purely on direct interaction, and those opinions were universally positive. This created an expanding circle of advocates who could testify to your character from first-hand experience. Your accuser realized they were facing a nightmare scenario. Your reputation was growing beyond their ability to control or influence it. The lies they had carefully planted in local soil were being overshadowed by truth growing in gardens they couldn't access. Their smear campaign, which had seemed so effective in contained environments, proved powerless against the organic spread of authentic relationships and genuine accomplishments. The psychological pressure on them intensified as they watched you not just survive their attacks, but transform them into stepping stones toward greater success and deeper wisdom. This violated their fundamental understanding of how the world works. In their mind, their lies should have destroyed you, your reputation should have crumbled, your life should have fallen apart. The fact that the opposite occurred challenged their entire worldview and forced them to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of reality, justice, and spiritual law. Hey, this is Mike and Airy cutting into your regularly scheduled Chosen One programming for just a moment. We are the founders of the Obsidian Inner Order and the Astral Atom Network, and we're done playing nice. We're in a spiritual war. You know it, we know it, we know it. And we're out here bleeding for this mission full-time. I'm hungry for fourth-dimensional Archon blood, but we need the ammunition. So listen, when you join the Inner Order, you're not just supporting us, you're getting access to exclusive tools they never wanted you to have. Psychic self-defense training, targeted individual intel, spiritual warfare tactics they scrub from the internet, and every week, we meet in secret, chosen ones only on Zoom. No filters, no fluff, just real gnosis, real family, real power. It's a 360-degree win. You get what you need. We get to keep fighting, so don't just watch. Drop a like, share this video to everyone you know. Now, and join the Obsidian Inner Order. Let's finish what we started. Link in the description. Let's freaking go. The fifth domino collapsed when it became clear that you had receipts, not just physical evidence, but spiritual, emotional, and energetic documentation of everything that had transpired. While your accusers moved on like nothing happened, assuming you'd be too broken to gather yourself together, you were quietly putting pieces together. You healed and remembered. You weren't collecting ammunition for revenge. You were gathering clarity to prevent future gaslighting from winning. Your very existence became proof they couldn't erase. You didn't come back loud, you came back whole, and that wholeness alone was threatening because it meant you had your voice, your strength, and your truth intact. You knew what happened, who did what, when and how. You had timelines they forgot you lived through, truths they hoped you'd be too shattered to ever speak, let alone live out loud. The cosmic irony reached its peak when the very people who had warned others about you started becoming the ones others warned each other about. The patterns of behavior they had projected onto you, the drama, the instability, the manipulation, began manifesting more obviously in their own lives as the stress of maintaining false narratives took its toll. They found themselves increasingly isolated, not because of any campaign against them, but because authentic people naturally distance themselves from those who traffic in deception. This isolation wasn't immediate or dramatic, it was gradual and organic. People simply began finding excuses to avoid interactions that left them feeling drained or confused. Invitations became less frequent, phone calls went unreturned, social circles naturally contracted around them as others unconsciously protected their own peace and clarity. The energy required to maintain lies is exhausting, and that exhaustion becomes palpable to sensitive individuals. What made this isolation particularly painful for your accuser was that it couldn't be blamed on any external force. There was no conspiracy against them, no coordinated campaign of exclusion. People were simply responding to the energy they carried and the chaos that seemed to follow them. The very outcomes they had tried to create for you were manifesting in their own experience through the natural operation of spiritual law. The stress of maintaining false narratives began showing up in other areas of their life as well. Relationships became more difficult as the habit of deception bled into other interactions. Work performance suffered as emotional energy was diverted toward damage control. Health issues emerged as the body responded to chronic stress and internal conflict. The attack they had launched against you was boomeranging back toward them with compound interest. But perhaps the most devastating aspect of their situation was the growing awareness that they had created their own prison. Every lie they had told about you became a bar in the cage of their own making. Every false narrative they had spread became a chain binding them to a version of reality that was increasingly difficult to maintain. They had become slaves to their own deception, trapped by stories they could neither abandon nor successfully defend. The sixth domino fell when their entire reputation was revealed to be built on making you the villain they actually were. Their popularity, their trustworthiness, even the sympathy they received, it was all constructed on painting you as the problem. They didn't need facts, they just needed enough drama, enough emotion, and the right crowd of people willing to believe a well-told story. You became the scapegoat they used to wash themselves clean, throwing your name under the bus to step into spaces they didn't deserve. Your absence from their spaces didn't bring the peace they promised. Instead of harmony, things got messier. The same drama kept happening, but now you weren't around to absorb the blame. The energy didn't lighten, it got heavier. The conversations didn't become more respectful, they became more manipulative. The unity they guaranteed never materialized, and people began to notice that when you were gone but the conflict remained, the math stopped adding up. Your silence throughout this entire process wasn't passivity, it was strategy of the highest order. You understood something that your accusers didn't. Truth doesn't need to be defended, because truth defends itself. Lies require constant maintenance, endless justification, and increasingly elaborate explanations to cover their inconsistencies. Truth simply exists, patient and persistent, waiting for reality to reveal what was always there beneath the fabrications. During this period of strategic non-engagement, you were also developing what could be called spiritual immunity, the ability to remain centered and clear regardless of external chaos or attack. This immunity didn't come from building walls or shutting down emotionally. It came from developing such a strong connection to your own truth that external opinions lost their power to destabilize you. The seventh and most devastating domino crashed when your reputation outgrew their slander entirely. When they tried to bury you, they thought small, limiting their campaign to your immediate circle, assuming your influence ended where theirs did. They believed that poisoning a few wells would ensure no one would ever come to you for water again. But real purpose doesn't ask for permission, and truth doesn't stay confined to zip codes or social circles. While they were busy trashing your name in whispered conversations and group chats, you were evolving quietly and relentlessly. You didn't fight their campaign of character assassination with retaliation, you responded with results. You got better, wiser, more focused. And as your growth continued, people from beyond their circle started to notice. People with wider vision, people they never considered, people whose opinions actually mattered in the grand scheme of things. Suddenly, the very name they tried to tarnish locally started being celebrated in spaces they could never access. Your work was being quoted in rooms they couldn't enter. Your story was inspiring people they'd never meet. Your influence had transcended from personal to universal, and now they were facing the humiliating reality that their lies only worked when you were just someone they used to know. As your spiritual evolution continued, something even more profound began to happen. You started to feel genuine compassion for the people who had tried to destroy you. Not the fake forgiveness that comes from spiritual bypassing, but the deep understanding that comes from recognizing that hurt people hurt people. You could see that their attacks on you were really attacks on their own unrealized potential, their own abandoned dreams, their own rejected authentic selves. This compassion arose from a place of genuine wisdom rather than weakness. You began to understand that their behavior toward you was never really about you. It was about their own internal battles with inadequacy, fear, and self-hatred. They had projected their shadow onto you because facing it within themselves felt impossible. In attacking you, they were trying to destroy the parts of themselves they couldn't accept or integrate. Your compassion also extended to those who had initially believed the false narratives about you. You recognized that most people aren't equipped to discern truth from skillfully crafted lies, especially when those lies are delivered with emotional intensity and seeming conviction. You understood that believing false stories about others is often a reflection of naivety rather than malice, inexperience rather than bad intentions. The eighth and final domino fell when your accusers realized that their panic wasn't just about being exposed, it was about being rendered irrelevant. Your growth had taken you so far beyond their reach, so far above their level of consciousness, that their opinions about you carried no more weight than a child's opinion about quantum physics. They weren't just wrong about you, they were operating from such a limited perspective that their wrongness was almost pitiable. What they feared most wasn't what you would say about them, it was what your very existence said about the contrast between truth and lies, between authentic power and manufactured drama, between someone who grows through adversity and someone who creates adversity to avoid growth. Every time someone observed you closely without the filter of their fabrications, the comparison made their behavior look increasingly erratic, desperate, and small. Your reputation, built on the solid foundation of lived truth rather than the shifting sands of fabricated stories, became unassailable. Not because you were perfect, but because you were real. Not because you never made mistakes, but because you owned them and learned from them. Not because you were without flaws, but because your flaws were authentic, rather than hidden behind masks of false perfection. The people who had once whispered about your supposed failings now found themselves in conversations about your obvious transformation. Former skeptics became curious observers, then admirers, then allies. Your circle expanded to include individuals who valued authenticity over image, substance over style, truth over comfort. You discovered that the world was full of people who had been waiting their entire lives to meet someone who was genuinely, unapologetically real. Time became your ultimate vindicator, not through dramatic confrontations or public exposures, but through the patient, relentless process of reality asserting itself. Time is an unbiased judge that doesn't rush to conclusions and never needs witnesses to testify. What time does is quietly peel away every layer of falsehood until only truth remains. They tried to pin you down with lies, hoping their stories would become your reality, but time wouldn't allow that distortion to stand. Your vindication didn't come through moments of anger or retaliation, but through the steady, unwavering presence of your authentic self. Every day you lived contradicted their stories without you saying a word. Every step you took forward was a quiet rebellion against the lies they spread. The truth about you was always there, hidden beneath the noise. Time just had to give people the chance to see it clearly. But perhaps the most beautiful part of this entire cosmic drama is how it resolves, not with your accusers being punished or exposed in some dramatic fashion, but with them being given the same opportunity for transformation that you seized. Your example becomes a silent invitation for them to examine their own relationship with truth, to consider whether the energy they're spending maintaining false narratives might be better invested in authentic self-development. Some will take this invitation, recognizing in your journey a roadmap for their own healing. They'll see that the path you walked from wounded to healer, from victim to victor, from target to teacher, is available to anyone willing to choose growth over stagnation, truth over comfort, authenticity over acceptance. Others will double down on their deception, becoming increasingly isolated in a world that grows more hungry for authenticity with each passing day. The final revelation is that your transformation isn't just personal, it's part of a larger shift happening across consciousness itself. Chosen ones everywhere are stepping into their power and refusing to accept anything less than truth. The old games don't work anymore. The old tricks have lost their power. The old ways of controlling and manipulating others are becoming obsolete in a world that's waking up to what's real. Your journey from the shadows of false accusations to the light of undeniable truth represents something far greater than individual victory. It's the story of consciousness itself evolving through individuals brave enough to use opposition as fuel for transformation. Every chosen one who rises gives permission for others to do the same, creating ripples of awakening that spread far beyond any single life or circumstance. The tremor in the shadows that we spoke of at the beginning, it's the sound of an old world crumbling, a world where lies could masquerade as truth, where manipulation could pass for wisdom, where spiritual poverty could hide behind spiritual language. The panic of those who trafficked in lies is simply the birth pains of a new reality, where truth reigns supreme, and where people like you, authentic, powerful, unshakable, set the standard for what it means to be genuinely human. And so we return to where we began, but with eyes that see more clearly, hearts that beat with deeper purpose, and souls that recognize the cosmic significance of what has transpired. The tremor in the shadows isn't something to fear, it's something to celebrate. It's the sound of truth reclaiming its rightful place, of light exposing what was always hidden in darkness, of chosen ones everywhere stepping into the power they were always meant to wield. The greatest victory isn't that they were wrong about you. The greatest victory is that you became everything they said you could never be. And in doing so, you lit a beacon for every other chosen one who is still finding their way out of the darkness and into the light of their own magnificent truth. The panic they feel isn't just about their lies being exposed, it's about witnessing the birth of something they never believed possible, a world where authenticity wins, where truth prevails, and where chosen ones like you lead the way into a reality built on foundations that can never be shaken by lies.